Welcome to Baseball Biz on Deck. I'm Mark Carpenter, your host, and with me today, I have a man who knows all about the Rays on this special Rays Up edition of Baseball Biz on Deck. And I'm talking about Mr. Josh Weaver. Josh is a baseball historian. He stays in touch with the game daily. He's working as a lead man up there with the Tampa Baseball Museum in Ybor. He also is a fan host. And Josh, you got to do something this week that I only wish I could have. And that's to be at the opening day of the Tampa Bay Rays. Welcome, Josh. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me, Mark.
It is great to have you here, buddy. Now, Josh and I have known one another for about a half a year or so now and had the good opportunity to work with one another occasionally up at the museum. Josh, you've done a great deal with that, and there's a lot evolving. And I'd like to get more on that about the Tampa Baseball Museum a little later in the show. So we'll make sure we cover that as well.
Sounds good.
All right. Dude, there you go. You were there. You were at the Trop. All that excitement. Everybody's been waiting for so long. Spring training's there. Okay, but those aren't real games. Okay, really, let's face it. Yeah, you got split squads. You got guys that aren't probably giving everything because they're saving it for the real season. What was it like when you went into the Trop the other day on opening day?
It was great. Ironically enough, this was my first Tampa Bay Rays opening day that I've ever participated at as a fan or a fan host. So it was a really unique perspective to be able to do it as a fan host and actually welcome everybody to the Trop. I was in the outfield as far as my positioning that day, and it had the atmosphere of a playoff game. I'll be honest with you, Mark. It was buzzing. The Trop, right now, we don't have the third deck open. So it was technically considered a sellout. So it was nice that we could sell out opening day for the guys. And I think that the players really do appreciate when we have a full ballpark.
Oh, yeah. I know I went to the Fan Fest about a month ago or so, and the crowd, the line to that was amazing. But I'm excited to hear that you were out there. What was some of the hoopla? How they roll out some of the things on this opening day?
They started, and obviously because of them being in the playoffs last year, one of the first things they did is they have the banner prepared, but have it covered up with black. One of the first things they do is they drop the tarp from the banner to go ahead and list the 2022 wild card champ. We made it to the, a little bit in the playoffs, but it's always good when you can start an opening day when you can raise a banner. So it's really good to see, and the fans went nuts for that. I think that's always a highlight when you can always watch. Which it's witnessing history. Anytime you can drop a banner at the Trop is always a good day.
That's a lot of excitement. I'm glad they were able to do that. And as part of rolling things out, they had a very special guest to do the first pitch out there, didn't they?
Yeah, it was good to see James Shields come out, especially Big Game James, and he's beloved by Rays fans. He was always one of my favorites as just a fan. And to have James Shields come out and do start for the 25th anniversary of the Rays being there, it was really a special moment. And I think he really appreciated it, and the crowd went nuts for him. It was really a good moment, I think, for the fans and for him personally. He seemed to really enjoy the moment. Yeah, you can't get any better than having Big Game James throw out your opening pitch.
Yeah. From what I saw, he really enjoyed it quite a bit too. I saw some of him, I guess, on the Valley Sports, and I heard him on with, what the Rays Network. So he was intermingling with all those folks, and it was a great value. He was there at a time when the Rays were trying to turn around an attitude the way things were going, when the Rays were just seeing it at the bottom. But he was there at a time was Carl Crawford, I think, was about the same time, and they started really gearing the Rays up with a lot more energy and positivity at that time.
I agree, Mark. And I think one thing they did too is they certainly brought the pitching staff. You had James Shields, and then later you had David Price come in, and you had Matt Garza come in. So Scott Kazmir was there before. So you really had this great pitching core that kind of built the new team, if you will. And I think that, like you said, then you had the hitters. You had Carl Crawford, and that's around the time that Carlos Pena came through. And of course, Longoria was coming up. So you really had this core group of players that, and I think will forever endear themselves to Rays fans. And of course, you lead off with the head coach. When the manager Joe Maddon got there, I really think he was the core ingredient that kind of put everything together. And of course, he went on to success over with Chicago winning the World Series. But I think Rays fans, anytime you talk about Joe Maddon or James Shields or any of these guys, just the love that the Rays fans have. And they're always going to be it's the 25th anniversary, but these guys really were probably one of the favorite teams of Rays fans.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say, looking at that, and we're mentioning a big deal about the pitching. We were looking there at Mr. Shields, but there's a lot of great talent with the pitching staff right now. Who was it that wrote things off the mound the other day for the Rays?
Yeah, the fact that they had local college product Shane McClanahan start the game, and I think his career is just going to keep soaring. He last year you saw the performance he put in, and to have I went to USF, so to have a USF bull up there leading the charge, I think was just great for the Rays and for all of Tampa.
No, I know. I was glad to see it. And the team played real well. What the final score was 4-0. And if you look at the offense that was put out there the other day, you had Siri. Here he comes in. He was a solo home run there. So a home run hit and an RBI. And then Wander Franco, that was also, I guess, another solo home run.
The whole lineup, top to bottom, I think what was good for the Rays is the fact that we kept these hitters. No, and also the defense. I'm sure you saw Margot's play out in the outfield. That got the crowd really electrified when he made that. You saw, I'm sure on TV, he was just laid out for that
Oh,
catch,
yeah.
and it was an awesome catch. And being in the outfield, I had a pretty good view of him making the catch. He's a good player. And then with Randy Rosarena leading that, he's such a dynamic player. And I think what was cool to see with Randy was in the World Baseball Classic, we know as Tampa Bay Rays fans what Randy's capable of and his spirit and his drive and his enthusiasm. But being able to be on the World Baseball Classic stage playing for Mexico, I really think that the country and the world now knows Randy and what he's capable of. Really, we really kept a lot of the players as far as the Rays. And as you sometimes, Mark, some years are a little more lean as far as what they have to do in revamping the team. But really, obviously, with Kevin Kiermaier, the face of the franchise, for longer being there, but we still have a good core group, and I think that this team is a real team. I think they're going to build from last season, and I would expect them to see these guys go far in the playoffs, in my opinion.
It's interesting to see this team as it is today. You and I both, as Rays fans, we saw last year what happened. We mean, by All-Star break, it's okay. How many of these guys are still there from the beginning of the year? How many of them are not injured? And we brought in a whole bunch of new fellas, including Peralta. I think Siri came in. When did Siri come in? Did he come in around that time, or is he earlier than that?
I think he did. I think you're right, Mark. I think that's around when he came
Yeah.
in.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, the talent, because they talk about the depth of the Rays, but what they do in trades and what they do in their farm system, it just was like next man up. It's a cliche, but then the Rays use it. But with the Rays organization, I really think, Mark, that that's where they keep winning. You just never know the talent that's going to come up next. And the fact that Wander Franco, they got him for the Rays for that's a long-term contract.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be, the character and the passion that these guys have. You can see it on the field. And like I said, it was really good, I think, for the players too, that we had a good house. We sold our version of a sellout. And because they feed off that, the fact that these guys, and obviously, Kevin Cash being from the Tampa Bay area, it's so cool to be able to see him represented Tampa the way he's done and what his career has been is just been, I think has been phenomenal as the manager of the Tampa Bay Rays.
He keeps that engine running. I mean, he's been there for a little while, but he came in as a young man. He still looks pretty young as far as the vitality of how he manages that team. And one thing I heard, I can't remember, it was Neil Solondz or somebody else who was talking about Kevin. And they said that during the winter games or right after, he went and he visited Siri. He wanted him to know that he was going to be on the field. I don't know if he meant every day, but he was going to have him out there. And I guess he wanted to give him if he had any questions, give him all assurances that young man was going to be playing. And I'm so glad he did. Siri can be a little bit of a showboat, which kind of, when Kiermaier, you could see that Kiermaier was probably going to be leaving last year. And you saw Siri out there. I said, I see a little Kiermaier out there. I see some little pizzazz. And to the other outfielders, as you're talking about Randy, of course, but going back to Margot, wow, that play out in right field, that was stunning. The man practically had himself floating parallel to the ground about a foot above it to catch that ball, his entire body. And it was like, good gravy. And if anybody hasn't seen it, look it up. It is well worth seeing. They provide a great team. They provide great entertainment. And I know opening day is always exciting. Like you said, I'm glad to hear they had the sellout. And it sounds like both the team and the fans had a great time.
Yeah, and it was nice just all around. I think one thing is working at the stadium, it was cool to see Stu come out and actually greeted the fan host. He did before the game. He made sure during our meeting he came over and thanked us for being there. So really, it's a top to bottom organization where it's just cool that the owner, the principal owner, comes out and thanks the fan hosts and the day-to-day people for being there and charges us all up. And it was a nice surprise because when the vice president said we got a special guest, and yeah, then Stu came out, it was really nice. I think it meant a lot for us as fan hosts, and just a good rallying point.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because a lot of times upper management can be detached from the workforce within. And while I don't think they necessarily need to be out there elbow to elbow with them throughout the day, I think it's good to show the support to all the folks that are doing that work out there. So as a fan host, you pretty much got to do everything, right? You got to give that positive, magical experience to everybody who comes through that door, almost Disney-like, some might say. But the whole idea of keeping everybody happy, keeping them safe, there's a lot of different things going on. It's almost like an umpire. You got to keep your eye on the ball. You got to make sure what's going on and taking care of these fans. What are some of the experiences you've had over the years that are worth telling, or some stories maybe some fans have shared with you?
Even in opening day, I was walking up and down the aisle as we do, making sure everybody's doing okay, and there was a group of Detroit Tiger fans there, and the lady on the end, she's I don't think anything can take that smile away from you today. You are just in. You're in the zone today. And I said, yeah, I said, it's opening day. And I said, it's baseball's back. And I said, I had a really good group in my section. Everybody was the kids were there having a good time. And I had one kid, just a quick story about, like I said, more opening day stories. But this lady you just can't get the smile off your face. I said, man, it's opening day. I said, baseball's back. And she said, that's right. And the Rays fans and the Tigers fans, we were all mixed. Everybody's mixed together, having just a good time. And then when they were doing batting practice, there was a young fan comes up and he walks up to me and says, yeah, I'm in the front row. So I'm like, okay, yeah, go ahead and get your front row seat. And he says, yeah, today is my birthday. He says, and I'm skipping school. If you're going to skip school, I guess going to a Rays game is a pretty opening day. And he was just really excited. And the wild thing, one of the players from the Detroit Tigers actually tossed him a ball, and he gave it to another younger fan.
Oh my gosh.
And he was a kid as well, and it was his birthday. And I said to him, I gave him a fist bump, and I said, that was really cool of you. And he says, yeah, he says, I've already got some. And he says, I just wanted to share with somebody else. It was just, I'm not going to say everything is always perfect, but it was a pretty close to a perfect opening day. But to your point about fan hosts, it's one of the great stories. This happened last year. I was up in the party deck, and I had an individual come to me, and I don't speak Spanish. I know a little bit of Spanish, and he didn't speak English. So it was just a really interesting conversation we had, because what I got out of it is he was asking me if he could go down to the front row for a little bit because there was nobody down there on the third deck, and maybe to try to get a ball. So I said, okay. I said, yeah, you can go down there, because like I said, it was a thin crowd, Mark. So it was like, and you could tell he was just a passionate fan. And then he was there with his family. So later I saw him with the ball. He actually got the ball. And so I gave him a fist bump and I said, congratulations on that. And then his son was there. And so it was cool. So we were able to get a translator, being the son. That's the thing about baseball is I was speaking English, he was speaking Spanish, but yet we understood each other because of baseball. It's the universal language if you love the game. And it was just one of those really touching moments, Mark, where it was like two totally different people it was from Venezuela. And like I said, then I got to talk to the family, and I told the son, I said, well, please congratulate him for me for being able to get the ball, because it's just what he wanted, and we were able to make it happen for him.
I'm really glad to hear that, because that sounds like, to me, the ultimate of what a fan host should be able to do. And that's to create, like when I was there years ago, I do remember, I thought they did say magical experience. And that sounds like what you're able to do for that young man. To be able to have the language is baseball. So congratulations to you and all the other fan hosts who are doing that out there. And I appreciate everything you do when I come and visit as a fan, and seek you guys out for everything. He said, where can I find this? Is there a special kind of hot dog, or can I find those vegan nachos? And
you're right, Mark. That's one of the things that it's almost like you have to be a Swiss Army knife out there. Like you said, you have done this before, because you never know, because it's in what we always try to instill is the fact that you don't know whose first baseball game that is ever. You have somebody coming in the stadium, they may be a young fan, which is easy to tell. They're a little kid. If they're older, it still might be their first time in a baseball game ever, or it could be their first time for us with us at Tropicana Field. So you always what we want to try to do is make sure that person gets that experience, and you just never know. And I know throughout history, players will talk about that. They want to have a good performance because you don't know who's going to their first game. And I think it's for me, it's as a fan host, I think it's that way for me. And I think most of the fan hosts, I'll tell you just quickly, the kind of people that I work with, I started out in the middle of the time. It was the end of July. And so I was what I call myself a mid-season replacement. And I the fan host there, no one ever once said, "Oh, that's not my job to teach you." They all took the time to make sure the veteran staff that I knew what to do, whether they were one of the leads or regular, just another fan host. The caliber of the people that work there, and they are very caring and they want to make sure people, like you said, Mark, are safe. That's job one of everybody because you don't want anybody getting hurt anywhere at any time. And if you can mitigate some of that, that you're always almost trying to foreshadow what could happen and try to make sure everybody's safe, whether it be kids or adults. We have a diverse population that lives in Florida age-wise. So we want to make sure that whether you're 99 or you're 9 months, that everybody's taken care of and everybody's safe. And I think we do a pretty good job at Tropicana Field with that.
I believe so as well. I've heard others, even national numbers, that the Tampa Bay Rays fan hosts are up here at the top. I don't have those studies with me anymore, but I wasn't surprised. They run a very good ship. They are very selective about having people with a positive attitude in there and people who have leadership qualities. I felt very welcomed when I started there years ago, and I felt like there was a lot of guidance to get me through some of the beginnings to try to understand some of those things. Jumping to something as far as getting into something, or excuse me, getting through some difficult times, I want to look for a moment back to the players. And playing Detroit the other day, think anytime you're a baseball fan, you're going to find players you enjoyed watching one place appear somewhere else. And with the Tigers playing the other day, there was somebody I definitely wanted to see on the field, and that was Mr. Austin Meadows. And
yes,
he had some difficulties last year and some mental health issues, which he came out about and even put a statement out about. I'll probably put a link to it later here if somebody wants to see that. He owns up to all that. He was actually not so much looking for understanding for himself. I think it's sharing to make other people more comfortable if they had similar difficulties and to seek help. I've got a lot of respect for him with that. I know he's a young man, got a young child and his wife, but he's back and he looked pretty good yesterday.
yeah, and not only that, obviously during the pregame ceremony, the ovation that the Rays fans gave him, I hope he heard everybody in the stadium cheering for him because I all of a sudden I realized I'm clapping. Here I am as a fan host, supposed to be making sure everybody's okay. But I tell you, Mark, when they announced his name, it was a good moment at the stadium, and I know he heard us, but I hope he understands that how much we appreciated him being with the Rays organization. So as a fan, not a fan host, but just as a fan, I found myself clapping for Austin because, and like you said, when players have their people. And as role models, I think sometimes it's okay now for people to say, listen, we all don't have perfect lives. We all have issues. And I think maybe it gives people hope. And I think it gives people can gravitate and realize that it's okay if you need help to ask for help. I know this is talk about another great Rays player. I was looking at a thing on Ben Zobrist recently.
Oh, yeah.
And they honored him in his hometown area. And he was talking about how he wants to get back to the game. And of course, Ben Zobrist was beloved by Rays fans as well. Just one of the great Rays. And I was glad to see him go on and have success elsewhere. Obviously, with Chicago, with Joe Madden, that was a pretty good dynamic Rays duo that went up there. One of the things that Ben mentioned is that he would like to get back into baseball. But one thing he wants to do is actually work what you're saying, Mark, on that aspect of it as far as mental health. Not just so I don't know that I want to come back as a coach, but I think that's a movement that we're going to hopefully see more of, that people understand that players are people too.
Oh, yeah. And you think of not just players, but they're usually very young people. Maturity skills come over time, but even so, age isn't the only thing. These guys are coming into the major leagues at and there's a world in front of them. They had no idea what was going to happen. Maybe this thing that Zobrist is doing will be able to help those folks before they get down a road that can be difficult for them. Again, I was glad he owned up to it, his own personal challenges, and share with people what his way to come back to that. But even more, I'm happier to hear the response that the crowd gave him the other day on opening day, because it's well deserved, and he is a beloved player.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely like I said. You look around, and he actually, I would say, got one of the loudest cheers of even with comparable to a lot of the Rays players, because I think, like you said, Mark, that's how much people were glad to see him back and to see him with the Tigers. It's weird to see him in a Tigers uniform, but it was good to see him.
Yeah, I'm really glad. So it sounds like it was a great time for all. You walk away with a win the first day out, and then get a day of rest. that kind of surprise. You got opening day, and then go ahead and take a break, guys. So I guess they'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow being Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, it's another, and then the weekend series will complete on Sunday with Detroit. On Sunday, one of the things that they're doing for opening day, I didn't mention this, is they actually open the gates 2 hours early.
Oh,
So you really could get in there and get settled in. And if you wanted to just spend the day at the Trop, and because with it being a 3 o'clock start, little 3:10, I guess, it was really, but we welcome fans early. And I think for most of the weekends, that's what they're going to do. Is on Saturdays and Sundays, we're gonna open up the gates 2 hours early. And I think they said it's also on some Friday games and make it still an event, because obviously Sundays, and I'm working Sunday, it's going to be, they're going to honor Don Zimmer. He's going to be the first inductee into the Rays Hall of Fame, and certainly deserving with the Zim going in. And of course, they're going to have the Zim Bear bobblehead, which is an interesting conglomeration of a bobblehead, but I'm going to be there. It's one of those things that with his retired number 66, a lot of people will ask, what are the three retired numbers? Of course, you have Jackie Robinson at 42, you have Wade Boggs at 12, and you have Don Zimmer, who was just beloved of the Yankees organization with our organization. And it's somebody I think personally, maybe over time, will get in the Hall of Fame just because of his overall career. That's the 66 is for his 66 years in baseball.
wow.
You think what he was, he started as a young guy with the Dodgers. So it just, his career is just, and his time as a manager with not the White Sox, but I'm sorry, with the Cubs. So he's had a long distinguished career, and it's just cool to see him going in first. And then they're going to have Carl Crawford will go in, is he'll be the second inductee into the Rays Hall of Fame, and then Wade Boggs will be the third. So it's definitely a good trio of the first three to go in. And Carl Crawford during his time, obviously the catch. And I remember we went on that game as a fan, so I could get the shirt, the catch shirt. So he was a dynamic player too, fast. And I see a lot in some of these guys, like you're talking about Siri and Franco, and you have a lot of these guys that have the speed and the passion I think Crawford has. I think we're going to have a good team for several years. These guys are young and they're hungry. They got the taste of it last year, and I think they're 2020. They got that close to winning the World Series. But the Dodgers were a good team. That was a formidable group. Dave Roberts has got quite a machine over there in Los Angeles. But I think our guys, they showed they had a good effort, and I think this year is going to be outstanding. I think this 1-0 start. I think we're going to have a lot of wins this year.
I'm looking forward to it. I've always been poked fun at the front office at the Rays, but in the end, all I got to say is thank you, Erik Neander. With that man, we wouldn't have the team that we have. We wouldn't have the success that we have with the Rays and the guidance. If people are complaining about what we spend, to say, you know what? He must be spending it wisely, and he's picking talent. I think back to, was it from the Pirates where we got Glasnow and Meadows in a deal, both of those guys bringing them in, and it was like, yeah, somebody had a good eye for this talent. And
Yeah.
hell of a deal, man. Hell of a deal. So I got management's important thing when it comes to the persistent success of a team. Sometimes ownership can drop the ball, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes you just have a great team beneath you as well. When I'm talking here with Josh Weaver, one thing, I've known Josh for a little while, working together at the Tampa Baseball Museum. He leads up a lot of the good work that they do there. And one of the things that he did most recently was we got a call, I think, from Malcolm Sweat. And what was the organization they were with? Kind of tell that story.
Malcolm Sweat, he presented, I think he actually spoke to you first, Mark. I think you were the first contact with us. But yeah, Malcolm invited the Tampa Baseball Museum to go out for the opening ceremonies of the East Bay Youth Athletics. And it was a really nice event. He made sure that Arminda, who was our CEO now, was able to speak a little bit. I spoke a little bit, and he could not have been nicer to our museum. And he made sure we were able to set up a tent and really come out with the kids and kind of show off what we do at the Tampa Baseball Museum. And it was a wonderful event to see all these groups of kids come out there and march. They always had their flags in front, would say their banners were what teams they were with, and just to see the amount of youth there on one field and the parents and cheering for the kids as they marched around. But yeah, Malcolm Sweat reached out to us and said, we want you there, and we want to help promote the museum. And it was just a good win-win for everybody. It was a good baseball day, Mark.
Yeah, I was glad he came and he visited on an event too that the museum held recently in conjunction with, was it the Tampa Bay Hall of Fame? And so there was that going on. Was it baseball, bourbon, and cigars? Man, it was a nice little night this past Thursday. And all kinds of stars came out, whether it's football, hockey, baseball. Who are some of the guests that appeared that evening at the event?
One thing I was excited about seeing was Johnny Damon came in.
Yep.
He made the trip over from Orlando, and Johnny he was great. He took time to take photos with everybody that wanted photos. And thanks, Mark, for taking our photo for me and my daughter. I appreciate that. It was, because I had to get in there with Johnny too, real quick, and it could not have been nicer. He spent the whole evening there. There was a nice question and answers that he took part in. Mike Heath was actually on the '78 Yankees World Series team. He was the backup catcher for Thurman Munson, so he was there. So we had some pretty good. Phil Esposito, Hall of Fame hockey player, was there. We had several gentlemen that were as far as Super Bowl champions. So we had a really good mix of players, like you said, from different genres, not just baseball. And like to your point before too, it was an interesting experience because it's the Tampa Baseball Museum, and we hosted the VIP party the hour before. So that was neat to hang out with the players. And then to do it with the Florida Sports Hall of Fame is an interesting mix of and merger of two organizations. But I think we put on a pretty good event. And only in Ybor City, Mark, can you put baseball, bourbon, and cigars together and make it work. But it was a great night, and I think it was just a gorgeous day. And the players were very gracious. They were willing to sign autographs, take photos with people. So it was almost, I talked to some of the players, and they were almost appreciative of us inviting them. They're like, thank you. They really enjoyed the evening as well. And it wasn't one of these overwhelmingly size events where you can't get close to the players. It's one of those things where you really could get, like I said, I talked to Johnny a couple times. I asked him, I said, can you explain it? Do you have a vineyard? Because I don't know if you remember, Mark, but for a little bit, he had wine what it was for. He said, no, I don't actually have a vineyard. He paired up with a vineyard, and they produced this wine, Johnny Damon Wines, if you will. I don't know the name of it, but it was for charity. It was for some of the fallen police officers, as far as my understanding. So Johnny's out there, and he was talking about supporting the troops. It was just a good moment in law enforcement. So it was just nice to see the players come out and support us and the Florida Sports Hall of Fame. So it was just a good night all around. And like I said, what I loved about it was the fact that the fans could really interact with players. You could get one-on-one time with these different former Major League players, former National Football League players, former National Hockey League players. It was just great.
Who was that hockey legend that popped up out there?
Phil Esposito. And he stayed for a little bit, but I think if I'm not mistaken, he's in his early 80s now.
Anytime that fans can come together and spend some time with the players, that's huge. As you were mentioning earlier, Malcolm Sweat with the East Bay Youth Alliance, Gibsonton, I was glad that the museum was able to work closely with them and put together something as they were launching their whole new season with the Little League. And I hope that the museum's able to do more things like that in the future. But it talks about the camaraderie. And I've mentioned the museum several times. I really haven't said what it is. Can you give us a rundown of what somebody might expect when they come to visit the Tampa Baseball Museum in Ybor?
The first thing that people are always surprised of, and one of the first things I mention, is the fact that you're stepping into Al Lopez's home. And that's what really captivates. You can almost see the surprise on people's faces. They're like, really? And then they start looking around everything, because it was built in 1905. and it actually was moved from its former location. The DOT realized what it was when they were doing the interstate expansion. And so you tell the story of the house itself and the fact that Al Lopez grew up in this house. It's a casita, it's a Tampa casita. So it's relatively small. And the fact that he was one of 9 kids. So then you start talking about Al Lopez himself and being the first player that, from Tampa or Hillsborough County to make it into the major leagues. And then we tell the story about him being the first manager to make it from that area. And then we talk about him being the first Hall of Famer. The thing about Al Lopez is people don't realize his pedigree. The fact that he began it all for everybody. He was the first, but he was also one of the best. And the fact now, what I tell people is, yeah, as we guide people through the museum, one of the things that we point out is the fact that this is one of only 4 museums that were one-time players' homes or birthplaces. So people really, fans will travel. They are a group that they love to get their maps out and they love to see, if I'm going to the city, if I'm going to Tampa, St. Pete area, what is there to do that's baseball related? We are literally on the baseball map now. And that's something that I think, so I tell people the stories of, you have our museum, obviously being, since they're there, say we got the Al Lopez Museum itself, the Tampa Baseball Museum, the Al Lopez House. That's number one. And then you have, in Baltimore, you have the birthplace and museum for Babe Ruth. So people are fascinated by that. Some people have been there. And then you talk about the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum in Greenville, South Carolina. So that's the third. And then the fourth is, I always tie in with the Hank Aaron Museum. And that was also his childhood home in Mobile, Alabama. So when you start tracking things like that for baseball fans, then their eyes light up, because some of them be like, and everybody that's in our museum clearly has gone to one because they've been at our museum. And then some of them start telling stories of, yeah, I've been over to Baltimore. I've seen the birthplace for Babe Ruth. Or, oh, I didn't know that Greenville was, I had some people from Atlanta today. They were in here and they're like, wow, Greenville's not that far away. That's the beauty of the museum, is we talk about our baseball players that came from here, and the families, it's all about family. So yeah, you have Kyle Tucker and his brother Preston. So you've got brothers that are represented in our museum. One Kyle was on the World Series championship team last year for the Houston Astros. And then another teammate of his is Lance McCullers Jr. So he was on there. So you show them, you got 2 players that were on last year's World Series team, championship winning team. And then you got Preston and Kyle, brothers, and you got Lance McCullers Sr., Lance McCullers Jr. So you got father and son. And then you point out, then you move down the line, you talk about Dwight Gooden, got Doc Gooden, and the fact that he was the uncle of Gary Sheffield. It really ties baseball as a family sport together. People love baseball, and it's one of those things that's passed on from generation to generation. The fact that you can show this in like living history, what I refer to it at our museum, Mark, is our baseball wall that represents all the players that came from Hillsborough County. And that is it's my favorite, and it's pretty much the most photographed item in the museum, I think. It's also one of the things that's really, people will spend time, especially if you're from Tampa. People will say, yeah, I was at the airport the other day waiting for somebody to pick me up. One gentleman said he looked over and he says, there was Tino Martinez. So he waves to Tino, and Tino comes over and starts talking to him. Tino's obviously was born in Tampa, so he's represented. And right next to Tino is Luis Gonzalez, who, we're talking about tying my two jobs together, if you will, Mark. You have at the Rays Stadium, you have the first home run ever hit by anyone was Luis Gonzalez as a visiting player with the Detroit Tigers. Have Luis Gonzalez come in as a Detroit Tiger, hit the first home run as a native Tampa, somebody from Tampa. It was pretty amazing. And then, of course, you had Wade Boggs hit the first as a Double Ray. And even though Wade wasn't born in Tampa, we claim him because he's been there. He went to Plant High. It was really cool, the fact that you have Tropicana Field was broken in by 2 Tampa guys. You can't get any better than that either.
No. And I love it. The museum, like you said, it's a nice little casita. It's the home of Al Lopez, but a lot of history is told in there. It's a nice little area. I like the way it has a flow to it. You come in, there's some introduction to Al with some of his equipment and some things about the Al Lopez field. Then there's a wall that kind of curves and gives you some information about baseball in general and how things evolved in Ybor, and all of the collectible information in there as well. But the stories that come, and as much as you and myself sometimes share some stories with the guests that come in there, to me, we get the richest part of all because they share their stories with us. And that is absolutely rich. So if you want to have a good time, if you're involved with baseball, just want to get a glimpse of history, it's coming down to Ybor. You'll find on the map, it's listed as the Tampa Baseball Museum. It's a small little casita. And when they're open, there's a flag hanging out there off of the roof. And we hope to come to see you there. So can you share any other nuggets about the museum you'd let folks know to?
You never know who's going to show up there. We've had former players that have strolled in. Darren Clark came in one day, and I did not recognize him at the beginning. And it's just a quick story on him. He came in and he paid. And then he was telling me about how he signed a ball. And I'm thinking, oh boy, he's on our baseball wall, one of those 89 players. And he brought his wife and his son. And I said, we can give you a refund. I said, that's not a problem. I said, I apologize, Mark. I said, I didn't know at first. And I try to give people discounts. We always try to help people, veterans. And if you're teachers or whatnot, we try to do what we can for people. And he said, I'm a firefighter. So I'm like, okay. So I gave him the discount. And then after he paid, then he told me why he was there and who he was. And just real quick in the newsletter, he only was up for a cup of coffee in the major leagues. He spent his time in the Colorado Rockies organization he was a pitcher. But it's a cool story because he played in 2 games and it was 1.1 innings he pitched in. But what I referred to as his Moonlight Graham moment, his ERA is 0.00. And that's got a cool story. And one day I was working like you and I do there, and a gentleman came in first, and he had his wallet out, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "How many? There'll be 5 of us." And the last of the 5 in was Al Lopez Jr. And I said, "Yeah, put your money away." It was if your name's on the building, But it was one of those moments where we didn't know he was coming in. You just don't know who's going to be coming in the museum.
Josh, man, it's exciting times always up there at the museum. Like I said, you never know who's going to walk in the door. So I love it when some of those famous folks walk in and just regular fans, and some of them recognize one another. But it is always fun times there. There's always great history and great stories to be told. Anything else we should know about the museum?
Right now, the museum is open. The hours for the museum is 10 to 4, and we're open Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. So right now, and you don't have to make an appointment. You don't have to do a reservation. Just come on into the museum, and you or I, we're going to welcome whoever's coming in. And those are the hours. So yeah, definitely. Hopefully people will come in, and usually there's plenty of room. And we do have a little video we sometimes will present to people. And we also, like you said, the history. And sometimes you can plan on, I would say 30 minutes at the museum, but I've had people that they'll stay over an hour. And to your point about telling stories, is sometimes, as much as I like to talk, sometimes I quiet down because the average fan, they make these connections, and that's when we know we've done a good job at the museum. When you have these moments where people will start telling stories of their grandfathers or their fathers taking them to Wrigley Field or Fenway Park, or it could be Tropicana Field. It could be a brand new stadium like in Atlanta. I had a couple come in today with a little tiny baby, and they were Atlanta Braves fans, and it was just a great moment, and they had a good time, and they walked in. They spent probably a good 30 minutes. I spoke softly because I didn't want to wake the baby up, but bring your kids, because there's a neat thing for the kids. In the center of it, we have a little field of dreams there, and the kids like to walk around the bases. So there's something for the kids. There's games, there's trivia games that the kids like to play. They really get a kick out of, especially real quick, Mark, what we refer to as Pete's cleats. Pete Alonso's cleats are there, and they love to look at the dirt is still on there, the grass is still on there, and the kids, like I said, with the younger players, they know Pete Alonso. I mean, they may not know the history of the game yet, but they know the current game, and to see their faces light up when they see there's Pete's cleats right there. So yeah, open Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays right now and come in from 10 to 4, and we welcome anybody that comes in.
All right, man. I can't thank you enough, man. All you do as a fan host, and all you do as far as managing and leading up there at the Tampa Baseball Museum.
Good. Thanks for having me, Mark.
You've been listening to Baseball Biz. As always, you can find us on your favorite podcast directory, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and more. Thanks again, and remember, you can also check us out on Twitter at TheBaseballBiz. Take care and have a great week. Special thanks to X-Take RUX for the music rocking forward.